The vast and mesmerizing ocean hides predators that can strike with terrifying speed and precision. Shark attacks, though rare, are often violent, chaotic, and unforgettable. Bloodthirsty great whites ramming boats off South Africa. Aggressive bull sharks are disrupting police dives in Florida. Each story reveals the unpredictable and dangerous nature of these apex predators. In this video, we'll uncover 6 chilling encounters where survival came down to seconds, instincts, and luck. From firearm standoffs at sea to horrifying discoveries inside sharks. These are the true tales of shark attacks. In March 2018, off the rugged coast of Port Elizabeth, South Africa, the waters surrounding Algoa Bay held secrets that local fishermen had learned to respect over generations. This stretch of the Indian Ocean, where the warm Agulhas current meets cooler waters, had long been a hunting ground for great white sharks. The bay's history was peppered with tales of massive predators, some reaching lengths that defied belief, drawn by the abundant seal colonies that dotted the rocky outcrops. Captain Thabo Mathembu had been working these waters for over 20 years aboard his commercial fishing vessel, the Nomvula. His crew of 6 experienced fishermen knew the risks of their profession, but none had prepared them for what would unfold on that seemingly ordinary Tuesday morning. The boat, a sturdy 30-foot trawler, had departed before dawn, hoping to land a substantial catch of yellowfin tuna that had been running well in recent weeks. By mid-morning, their efforts had been rewarded with an impressive haul. The deck was slick with seawater and fish blood as crew members Sifo and Como worked methodically to clean and process the massive tuna they had hauled aboard. The 32-year-old deckhand had performed this routine countless times, his knife moving with practiced precision as he prepared the fish for market. The metallic scent of blood hung heavy in the salt air, creating a crimson trail that dispersed into the azure waters below. The crew failed to notice the dark shadow following their wake for over an hour. The great white shark, measuring an estimated 4.5 meters in length, had been drawn by the irresistible scent of fresh blood. Its prehistoric instincts kicked into overdrive as it tracked the source of the tantalizing aroma that promised an easy meal. The first impact came without warning. The massive predator slammed into the stern of the Nomvula with such force that the entire vessel shuddered, throwing several crew members off balance. Captain Mathembu initially assumed they had struck floating debris, a common hazard in these waters. However, his confusion quickly turned to alarm as he spotted the distinctive triangular dorsal fin cutting through the water just meters from the boat. Sifo continued his work, unaware of the danger lurking beneath the surface. The shark, emboldened by the concentrated source of blood, began circling the vessel with increasing aggression. Its powerful tail propelled it through the water with terrifying grace as it prepared for another assault on what it perceived as a threat to its potential meal. The second impact was even more violent than the first. The great white launched partially out of the water, its massive jaws agape, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth that had evolved over millions of years to tear through flesh and bone. The force of the attack sent a shower of seawater across the deck, and for a terrifying moment, the shark's head appeared over the gunwale. Sifo found himself in the wrong place at the wrong time in that split second of chaos. As he bent to retrieve a dropped knife, the shark's powerful jaws clamped down on his left leg just below the knee. The crushing force of the bite was immediately apparent as the predator's teeth punctured through his waterproof gear and into the muscle beneath. Sifo's agonized screams echoed across the water as the shark attempted to drag him toward the ocean. The other crew members reacted with a mixture of horror and determination. 2 men grabbed Sifo's arms and upper body, engaging in a desperate tug-of-war with one of nature's most efficient killing machines. The deck became a scene of pandemonium as blood from both the fish and the injured man mixed with seawater, creating an even more potent attractant for the enraged shark. After what felt like an eternity but lasted only seconds, the shark released its grip and slipped back into the water. However, the reprieve was temporary. The predator continued its relentless assault on the vessel, ramming the hull with such force that Captain Mathembu feared for the structural integrity of his boat. The repeated impacts threatened to breach the hull or capsize the entire vessel. With his crew member bleeding heavily and the shark showing no signs of retreat, Captain Mthembu decided that maritime authorities would later scrutinize. He retrieved a licensed firearm that he kept secured aboard the vessel for emergencies, specifically encounters with dangerous marine life that posed immediate threats to human life. The captain steadied himself against the boat's movement and carefully aimed as the shark surfaced for another attack. The single shot struck the predator near its left eye, causing immediate disorientation and pain. The massive fish thrashed violently before disappearing into the depths, trailing a thin stream of blood that gradually dispersed in the current. The crew immediately turned their attention to Sifo, whose leg bore deep puncture wounds and extensive bruising from the shark's powerful jaws. They applied emergency first aid and radioed for immediate medical assistance while returning to port at maximum speed. Sifo survived the encounter but required extensive surgery to repair the damage to his leg. The incident was thoroughly investigated by South African maritime authorities, who ultimately deemed Captain Mthembu's use of force justified given the immediate threat to human life and vessel safety. In August 2016, the waters off Cape Cod, Massachusetts, had become a focal point for marine researchers studying the increasing population of great white sharks in the North Atlantic. The area around Chatham and Provincetown had experienced a remarkable resurgence of these apex predators, drawn by the thriving seal colonies that had recovered dramatically since receiving federal protection decades earlier. The convergence of cold Labrador current waters with the warmer Gulf Stream created an ideal hunting ground that had attracted some of the largest great whites ever documented in New England waters. Anya Volkov, a 32-year-old marine biology graduate student, had traveled to Cape Cod with a group of fellow researchers for what was intended to be a routine data collection expedition. The team had secured permits to conduct behavioral observations of the local shark population, using advanced tagging equipment and underwater cameras to document feeding patterns and migration routes. Anya, whose expertise in marine predator behavior had earned her recognition within academic circles, was particularly excited about the opportunity to observe great whites in their natural habitat. The research station they had established near Race Point Beach provided an ideal vantage point for their work. The area's history was steeped in maritime tradition, with generations of fishermen and whalers working these waters since the early colonial period. Residents had grown accustomed to sharing their coastal environment with an increasing number of sharks, though attacks on humans remained extremely rare despite the growing population. On the morning of the incident, Anya volunteered to conduct preliminary water quality tests in the shallows near the beach. Her colleagues had initially expressed concern about swimming in an area known for shark activity, but Anya dismissed their worries, citing the statistical improbability of an encounter. She had equipped herself with standard research gear, including a waterproof data collection device and sampling equipment. That day, the water temperature registered at 68 degrees Fahrenheit, ideal conditions for seal activity and the great whites that hunted them. Visibility was excellent, with clear blue water extending beyond the shoreline. Anya entered the water approximately 50 meters from shore, where the depth reached roughly 12 feet over a sandy bottom dotted with occasional patches of seaweed. Her research colleagues, Dr. Marcus Chen and graduate student Rebecca Torres, maintained visual contact from the beach while setting up monitoring equipment. They observed Anya swimming methodically, collecting water samples and recording temperature readings at various depths. The routine nature of the work had lulled everyone into a sense of security that would prove tragically misplaced. The attack occurred with the sudden violence characteristic of great white predation. Dr. Chen later reported seeing a massive dark shape rise from the deeper water beyond the sandbar, moving incredibly fast toward the unsuspecting researcher. The shark, which marine biologists would later estimate at over 20 feet in length based on bite pattern analysis, struck from below with the element of surprise that made it such an effective predator. Anya disappeared beneath the surface without even having time to call for help. The water around the attack site became turbulent as the massive predator thrashed with its prey, creating a disturbance visible from the shoreline. Dr. Chen and Torres immediately called for emergency assistance while launching a small research boat in a desperate attempt to reach their colleague. By the time rescue teams arrived, there was no trace of Anya except scattered research equipment floating on the surface. The Coast Guard initiated an immediate search and rescue operation, deploying multiple vessels and aerial support to scan the surrounding waters. Local fishing boats joined the effort, and their crews became familiar with the area's currents and potential drift patterns. The breakthrough came 2 days later when Captain Joe Medeiros, a veteran charter boat operator with 30 years of experience in these waters, spotted an enormous great white shark exhibiting unusual behavior approximately 3 miles northeast of the attack site. The shark appeared to be struggling with something large lodged in its throat, causing it to surface repeatedly and show signs of distress. Marine enforcement officers arrived to find the shark in a severely weakened state, apparently choking on its prey. The massive predator, measuring just over 21 feet long and weighing an estimated 3 tons, was one of the largest great whites ever documented in New England waters. Veterinary specialists determined that the shark was beyond saving due to internal trauma caused by its inability to digest such a large prey item properly. When authorities examined the shark's stomach contents, they recovered Anya's remains along with fragments of her research equipment. The predator's size and power explained why the attack had been so swift and devastating. Marine biologists noted that the shark's unusual size suggested it was likely a mature female, possibly pregnant, which might have explained its aggressive feeding behavior. The incident sent shockwaves through the local marine research community and prompted immediate reviews of safety protocols for fieldwork in shark-populated waters. Anya's death marked the first confirmed fatal shark attack in Massachusetts waters in over 80 years, highlighting the changing dynamics of the marine ecosystem as both shark and seal populations continued to recover. The discovery provided closure for Anya's family while serving as a sobering reminder of the risks inherent in marine research. Her colleagues established a scholarship fund in her memory to support future marine biology students studying predator-prey relationships. In September 2019, the murky waters of the Hillsborough River near Tampa, Florida, presented a challenging environment for law enforcement dive teams conducting underwater investigations. This particular stretch of waterway had a long history of serving as a transportation route and, unfortunately, a dumping ground for evidence in criminal cases. The river's brackish waters, where fresh water from the Florida interior mixed with salt water from Tampa Bay, created an ideal habitat for bull sharks, one of the few species capable of surviving in marine and freshwater environments. Detective Raymond Kowalski, a 12-year veteran of the Tampa Police Department's Underwater Recovery Unit, had been called to investigate reports of a submerged vehicle that might be connected to a missing persons case. The 41-year-old diver had logged over 300 underwater recovery missions throughout his career, ranging from routine evidence collection to body recovery operations in some of Florida's most challenging aquatic environments. Historically, the Hillsborough River system was a crucial waterway for the region's development, serving indigenous populations for thousands of years before European settlement. The river has become increasingly urbanized in modern times, with industrial runoff and urban development affecting water clarity and creating the perfect murky conditions that bull sharks prefer for hunting. Local marine biologists have documented increasing numbers of these aggressive predators moving upstream, particularly during warmer months when their prey fish are most abundant. Kowalski's diving partner that day was Officer Maria Santos, a newer dive team member with 18 months of experience in underwater law enforcement operations. After completing advanced underwater rescue training, the 28-year-old officer had specifically requested assignment to the dive unit, driven by a desire to contribute to the more technical aspects of police work. The investigation centered around a late-model sedan that witnesses reported seeing driven into the river 3 days earlier during what appeared to be an argument between two individuals. Sonar equipment had located the vehicle in approximately 15 feet of water, positioned upside down on the muddy bottom near the boat ramp at River Hills Park. The location's accessibility made it a frequent site for legitimate recreation and illicit activities. Water conditions that morning were particularly challenging, with visibility reduced to less than 3 feet due to recent heavy rains that had stirred up sediment throughout the river system. The water temperature measured 79 degrees, ideal for bull shark activity, though the dive team was unaware of any recent shark sightings in the immediate area. Kowalski entered the water first, following standard protocol for underwater evidence recovery. His equipment included a standard police diving suit, an underwater lighting system, and cutting tools necessary to access the submerged vehicle. The detective's primary objective was to determine whether the car contained any occupants and to document the scene for potential criminal prosecution. As Kowalski descended toward the vehicle, the limited visibility forced him to rely heavily on his underwater lighting and tactile exploration to navigate the wreckage. The car had settled nose down in the soft river bottom, with the rear wheels and trunk area elevated several feet above the substrate. Thick layers of silt had already begun accumulating on the vehicle's surfaces, indicating it had been submerged for several days. The bull shark attack occurred as Kowalski worked to clear debris from around the driver's side door. The predator, measuring approximately 8 feet in length and weighing an estimated 300 pounds, had been attracted to the area by the disturbance created by the diving operation. Bull sharks are notorious for their aggressive nature and tendency to investigate any unusual activity in their territory, particularly in the confined spaces of river systems where they feel most secure. The shark's initial strike targeted Kowalski's left leg just above the ankle, where his diving suit offered less protection. The bull shark's powerful jaws clamped down with tremendous force, puncturing the neoprene material and creating deep lacerations beneath the muscle tissue. The detective immediately recognized the nature of the attack and began the defensive procedures he had learned during dive training. However, nothing had prepared him to fight off a large predator in zero visibility conditions. Officer Santos, who had been monitoring the dive operation from the surface, immediately recognized the emergency when Kowalski's distress signals reached her through their communication system. She entered the water without hesitation, following the guideline that connected her to her partner's position near the submerged vehicle. The shark released its grip after approximately 15 seconds of sustained pressure, apparently startled by Kowalski's aggressive defensive movements and the sudden appearance of the second diver. Bull sharks, while aggressive, typically prefer to avoid prolonged confrontations that might result in injury to themselves, particularly when dealing with large, active prey that fights back effectively. Both divers executed an emergency ascent, with Santos assisting her injured partner while maintaining awareness of their surroundings for any sign of continued shark presence. The ascent took longer than optimal due to Kowalski's injuries, but both officers reached the surface safely, where emergency medical personnel were already standing by. Kowalski's injuries required immediate medical attention, including multiple stitches to close the puncture wounds and treatment for potential infection from the river water contamination. The detective fully recovered and returned to diving duties 3 months later. However, the incident prompted the police department to implement new safety protocols for underwater operations in known shark habitats. The vehicle recovery operation was postponed for 2 weeks, while marine biologists assessed shark activity in the area. When divers eventually returned to complete the investigation, they used additional safety measures, including shark deterrent devices and increased surface support. The car was found empty, and the case was eventually closed as an insurance fraud investigation. In November 2017, KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa's coastline, provided the dramatic backdrop for an independent adventure film that would take an unexpectedly dangerous turn. The waters off Durban had long been renowned for their diverse marine life, including significant populations of great white sharks that migrated along the coast following the annual sardine run. This stretch of the Indian Ocean, where the warm Agulhas current creates ideal conditions for marine predators, has become a popular location for filmmakers seeking authentic oceanic settings for their productions. Lucas Reed, a 29-year-old actor from Los Angeles, had been cast as the lead in a low-budget survival thriller called Deep Current. After years of working in commercials and minor television appearances, the project represented his first major role. Reed had specifically sought out physically demanding roles that would showcase his athletic abilities and potentially launch him into action film stardom. The production company chose the Aliwal Shoal area, approximately 5 kilometers offshore from Umkomaas, for its crystal-clear waters and dramatic underwater topography. This marine protected area was formed by ancient dunes submerged thousands of years ago, creating a unique ecosystem that attracted recreational divers and marine researchers. The shoal's history included numerous shipwrecks dating back to the early shipping routes around the Cape of Good Hope, adding an element of authenticity to the film's maritime adventure theme. Director Sarah Holbrook insisted on practical locations rather than studio tank work, believing that authentic ocean conditions would enhance the film's realism. The production obtained all necessary permits from the KwaZulu-Natal Sharks Board and consulted with local marine safety experts regarding protocols for filming in shark-populated waters. However, the relatively small budget meant that safety measures were limited compared to major studio productions. The scene being filmed that morning required Reed to portray a shipwreck survivor swimming toward a rocky outcrop where he would supposedly find safety. The actor had trained extensively for the underwater sequences, working with professional diving instructors to ensure he could handle the physical demands of swimming in open ocean conditions, while maintaining the energy needed for a convincing performance. Water conditions that day were nearly perfect for filming, with visibility extending over 30 meters and relatively calm seas. The water temperature was measured at 24 degrees Celsius, comfortable enough for extended swimming sequences without requiring full wetsuits that might compromise the scene's authenticity. Reed wore only swimming trunks and a thin rash guard that would appear realistic for a shipwreck survivor. The film crew operated from 2 boats positioned approximately 50 meters apart. Underwater camera operators used scuba equipment to capture Reed's swimming sequences from below. Safety divers maintained positions around the perimeter of the filming area, though their primary focus was on preventing drowning rather than marine predator encounters. Reed had completed 2 successful takes of the swimming sequence and was beginning his 3rd attempt when the great white shark struck. Based on bite pattern analysis, the predator, later estimated at over 4 meters in length, had likely been attracted to the area by the swimming actor's unusual activity and splashing sounds. The attack occurred with the explosive violence characteristic of great white predation techniques. Reed later described feeling as though he had been hit by a speeding boat as the massive shark slammed into his right thigh from below. The impact alone was sufficient to disorient him, but the crushing pressure of the shark's jaws created an entirely different level of trauma. The great white's teeth, each measuring several centimeters in length and honed to razor sharpness through millions of years of evolution, punctured through Reed's rash guard and deep into the muscle tissue of his thigh. The shark's initial bite encompassed nearly the entire circumference of his leg, with the upper jaw pressing against his hip, while the lower jaw gripped just above his knee. Reed's survival instincts kicked in immediately as he began fighting against the predator with everything he could muster. He struck the shark repeatedly around its head and gills while simultaneously trying to pry its jaws open with his hands. The actor later credited his extensive physical training for providing the strength and endurance to mount an effective defense against such a powerful predator. The underwater camera operators captured the attack on film, though the footage was later deemed too graphic for inclusion in the final production. The safety divers responded within seconds, creating a disturbance in the water that may have contributed to the shark's decision to release its grip and retreat. After approximately 20 seconds of sustained pressure, the great white released Reed and disappeared into the deeper waters beyond the shoal. The actor surfaced in a state of shock, with blood streaming from multiple puncture wounds that had penetrated nearly to the bone in several locations. The film crew executed their emergency medical protocols with impressive efficiency, pulling Reed aboard the closest boat within minutes of the attack. The production's medic immediately applied a tourniquet to control the severe bleeding, while radiating for emergency helicopter evacuation to the nearest trauma center in Durban. Reed remained conscious throughout the rescue operation, though he exhibited clear signs of shock and blood loss. The helicopter arrived within 40 minutes of the attack, landing on a makeshift pad near the Umkomaas beach, where an ambulance was standing by for immediate transport to the hospital. Surgical teams at Durban's Level 1 trauma unit worked for over 6 hours to repair the extensive damage to Reed's leg muscles and blood vessels. The shark's teeth had narrowly missed several major arteries, likely saving the actor's life. Reed required multiple operations over the following weeks, but eventually made a complete recovery with only minor scarring as evidence of his encounter. The incident prompted significant changes in safety protocols for marine filming in South African waters. Reed eventually returned to acting but declined all future roles requiring ocean work, focusing instead on land-based action sequences where the risks were more manageable. In March 2014, the remote Daintree River region of far north Queensland, Australia, remained one of the few places where ancient predators ruled their domain with unchanged ferocity. This pristine waterway, flowing through some of the world's oldest rainforest, had served as home to saltwater crocodiles for millions of years, long before human settlement altered the landscape. The river system's complex network of mangrove-lined channels and freshwater pools created an ideal habitat for these apex predators, some reaching lengths exceeding 6 meters and weights approaching 1,000 kilograms. Mia Dawson, a 38-year-old Indigenous ranger with the local land council, had grown up in this unforgiving environment and understood better than most the delicate balance required to coexist with the region's dangerous wildlife. Her extensive knowledge of traditional land management practices and formal environmental science training made her an invaluable resource for conservation efforts throughout the Cape York Peninsula. The Daintree region's history spans over 60,000 years, with Aboriginal peoples developing sophisticated strategies for living alongside saltwater crocodiles and other dangerous predators. Traditional knowledge passed down through generations included a detailed understanding of crocodile behavior, seasonal movement patterns, and the locations where attacks most likely occur. However, even this accumulated wisdom could not eliminate all risks associated with life in one of Australia's most pristine but dangerous ecosystems. Dawson's husband, Tommy, was a professional barramundi guide who worked the Daintree's waters for over 15 years. His intimate knowledge of the river system's fishing spots earned him a reputation among visiting anglers seeking trophy-sized fish in one of Australia's most challenging environments. The couple had established their modest camp on a bend in the river where the water ran deep enough for decent fishing. Still, it maintained enough distance from known crocodile nesting areas to provide relative safety. On the morning of the attack, Tommy had positioned himself at his favorite fishing spot near a fallen tree that provided structure for barramundi to ambush their prey. Approximately 200 meters downstream from their camp, the location offered excellent fishing opportunities while maintaining visual contact with their temporary shelter. Water levels were slightly elevated from recent rainfall, which typically improved fishing conditions and increased the likelihood of crocodile movement between different sections of the river system. Mia had decided to collect firewood from the riverbank forest, a routine task she had performed countless times during their camping expeditions. The area she chose was approximately 50 meters upstream from Tommy's fishing position, close enough for normal conversation but far enough to avoid disturbing the fish with noise from her wood-gathering activities. The saltwater crocodile that would claim Mia's life had likely been monitoring human activity in the area for several days before striking. These ancient predators are renowned for their patience and ability to remain motionless for hours while waiting for the perfect opportunity to attack. The crocodile, later estimated at over 5 meters in length, based on bite pattern analysis and eyewitness accounts, had positioned itself in the shallow water near the riverbank, where overhanging vegetation provided perfect camouflage. Mia approached the water's edge to collect several pieces of driftwood that had washed up during the previous night's rain. The wood appeared ideal for their campfire, dry enough to burn well and large enough to provide sustained heat throughout the evening. Her familiarity with the area may have led to a momentary lapse in the constant vigilance required when working near crocodile habitat. The attack occurred at an explosive speed, making saltwater crocodiles such effective predators. Tommy witnessed the entire event from his fishing position. He later described how the massive reptile erupted from the water with unbelievable force, covering the distance between its hiding place and Mia's position in less than 2 seconds. The crocodile's jaws clamped down on Mia's torso with crushing force, immediately causing fatal injuries to her chest and abdomen. The predator's bite force, measured at over 3,000 pounds per square inch in laboratory studies, was more than sufficient to cause massive internal trauma. Tommy watched in horror as the crocodile executed its characteristic death roll, spinning its prey multiple times to disorient and drown the victim. Tommy immediately abandoned his fishing equipment and began shouting for help while attempting to reach his wife's position. However, the crocodile had already started dragging Mia toward deeper water, where it could complete its attack without interference. The entire initial phase of the attack lasted less than 30 seconds before predator and victim disappeared beneath the murky surface. Emergency services received Tommy's distress call within minutes of the attack, but the remote location meant that professional rescue teams would require several hours to reach the scene. Local indigenous rangers familiar with the area arrived first, bringing tracking equipment and specialized knowledge of crocodile behavior that might aid in recovery efforts. The search operation continued for 8 hours before Mia's body was recovered approximately 400 meters downstream from the attack site. The massive crocodile had consumed portions of its prey before abandoning the remains in shallow water near a sandbar frequently used by the reptiles for feeding. Wildlife authorities determined that the attacking crocodile was an exceptionally large male, likely displaced from its normal territory by seasonal flooding that had altered water levels throughout the river system. The predator's aggressive behavior was consistent with territorial disputes that often occur when environmental changes force multiple large crocodiles into closer proximity than normal. The tragic incident prompted renewed discussions about safety protocols for people working in crocodile habitats. However, local authorities acknowledged that eliminating risk was impossible in an environment where apex predators had maintained dominance for millions of years. Mia's death served as a sobering reminder that even experienced bush people with extensive knowledge of wildlife behavior remained vulnerable to attack when circumstances aligned against them. Tommy established a memorial scholarship in his wife's memory to support indigenous students pursuing careers in environmental management and wildlife conservation. In October 2020, the crystal-clear waters surrounding the Seychelles archipelago in the western Indian Ocean provided an ideal laboratory for marine researchers studying the behavior patterns of oceanic white-tip sharks. These remote tropical waters, located nearly 1,000 miles northeast of Madagascar, had long been recognized as a critical habitat for various pelagic species that rarely ventured into coastal environments. The Seychelles' unique geographical position, where deep oceanic currents converge with shallow reef systems, created an extraordinary ecosystem that attracted researchers worldwide. The archipelago's 115 granite and coral islands had emerged from the depths millions of years ago, creating a diverse marine environment that supported everything from microscopic plankton to massive whale sharks. The surrounding waters reached depths of over 4,000 meters, providing habitat for species that lived in the open ocean without ever approaching land. This pristine environment had remained largely unchanged for centuries, protected by its remote location and the Seychellois government's commitment to marine conservation. Dr. Mark Evans, a 43-year-old marine biologist, had dedicated the previous 8 years to studying open ocean shark species migration patterns and feeding behaviors. His research focused primarily on understanding how climate change and commercial fishing activities were affecting predator populations in the western Indian Ocean, work that required extensive periods conducting observations in some of the world's most remote waters. Evans had earned international recognition for his pioneering studies on pelagic shark behavior, particularly his work documenting the complex social structures among species previously thought to be solitary hunters. The Seychelles Research Station was established in 1987 as a collaborative effort between multiple international universities seeking to study the region's unique marine biodiversity. The facility's location on Mahe Island provided access to shallow reef environments and the deep oceanic waters where species like oceanic whitetips spend most of their lives. Historical records indicated these sharks had been abundant in Seychellois waters for centuries. However, recent studies suggested their numbers declined due to commercial fishing pressure throughout the Indian Ocean. Local fishermen had long reported encounters with oceanic whitetips, describing them as bold and curious sharks that often approach boats and investigate fishing activities. Traditional Creole folklore included numerous stories about these distinctive predators, recognizing their unique white-tipped fins and fearless nature that set them apart from other shark species in the region. Evans assembled a small research team for a 2-week expedition to document oceanic white-tip behavior in their natural habitat. The project required extended periods of open-water diving, often several miles from the nearest land, where the sharks felt comfortable approaching divers without the wariness they typically displayed in coastal environments. The research was part of a larger international effort to understand how oceanic white-tip populations responded to increasing pressure from commercial fishing operations targeting tuna and other pelagic species. His research partner, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, remained aboard their research vessel while Evans conducted underwater observations. The 36-year-old oceanographer had collaborated with Evans on similar projects throughout the Indo-Pacific region, providing surface support and data analysis that complemented his underwater behavioral studies. Mitchell's expertise in marine ecosystem dynamics provided crucial context for understanding how oceanic whitetip behavior might change in response to environmental pressures. The diving location selected for that morning's research session was approximately 8 miles southeast of Mahé, where the ocean depth exceeded 1,000 meters and oceanic species were most likely to be encountered. Water conditions were exceptional, with visibility extending over 40 meters and virtually no current complicating diving operations. The water temperature was measured at 28 degrees Celsius, ideal for shark activity and extended diving sessions without requiring thermal protection that might interfere with behavioral observations. Evans entered the water shortly after sunrise, when oceanic whitetips were most active and likely to approach divers with the bold curiosity that characterized the species. His equipment included specialized underwater cameras to document feeding behavior and data collection devices to record water temperature, depth, and other environmental variables that might influence shark behavior. The cameras were equipped with polarizing filters and specialized lenses that could capture clear images even in the deep blue water, where oceanic whitetips preferred to hunt. Oceanic whitetips had earned a reputation among marine biologists as one of the most inquisitive shark species, often approaching divers closely enough to investigate equipment and even making physical contact during encounters. While valuable for research purposes, this behavioral trait also made them potentially dangerous when their curiosity triggered defensive or aggressive responses. Historical accounts from shipwreck survivors in the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans had documented numerous encounters with oceanic whitetips, many describing the shark's persistent and fearless approach to potential prey. The first oceanic whitetip appeared within 20 minutes of Evans beginning his descent, approaching from the blue water beyond the visibility range with the confident swimming style that distinguished these open ocean predators. The shark, measuring approximately 3 meters in length, with the characteristic rounded fins that gave the species its name, began circling Evans at a distance of roughly 10 meters. Its distinctive white-tipped dorsal and pectoral fins were visible against the deep blue background, confirming its identity as a mature, oceanic whitetip. Evans maintained his position at a depth of 30 meters while documenting the shark's approach patterns and behavioral responses to his presence. The oceanic whitetip displayed typical investigative behavior, swimming closer with each circuit while maintaining a cautious interest in the unusual visitor. The shark's movements were deliberate and controlled, demonstrating the confidence that made oceanic whitetips such effective predators in the open ocean environment. As Evans continued his observations, he noticed the shark's interest intensifying as it focused on his underwater camera equipment. The shark's behavior changed dramatically when sunlight reflecting off Evans's underwater camera equipment created bright flashes that triggered its predatory instincts. Oceanic whitetips were known to investigate anything that might represent an injured fish or other potential prey, and the camera's metallic surfaces produced the type of visual stimuli that typically attracted their attention. The attack occurred without warning as the shark suddenly accelerated from its circling pattern toward Evans's position. The oceanic whitetip struck with its mouth open, biting down on the marine biologist's left forearm with sufficient force to puncture his thick neoprene wetsuit and penetrate the muscle tissue beneath. While smaller than great whites or tiger sharks, the shark's teeth were perfectly adapted for gripping and holding on to prey in the open ocean, where escape opportunities were limited. Evans immediately recognized that the bite was exploratory rather than predatory, as oceanic whitetips typically released objects that did not match their prey profiles. However, the shark's teeth were sharp enough to create multiple puncture wounds that began bleeding immediately, potentially attracting additional sharks to the area. The bite created several deep lacerations along his forearm, though the thick neoprene material had prevented more serious injury to the underlying muscle and bone. The shark released its grip within seconds and backed away, apparently startled by Evans' sudden defensive movements and the bubbles created by his breathing apparatus. Oceanic whitetips rarely engaged in sustained attacks on large objects that fought back, preferring to investigate potential prey through quick exploratory bites before deciding whether to continue their attack. Evans executed an immediate ascent while maintaining visual contact with the shark, which continued circling at a safe distance, but showed no signs of renewed aggression. His dive buddy protocol required him to surface slowly to avoid decompression sickness, while remaining alert for additional sharks that might be attracted by the blood dispersing from his injuries. The ascent took nearly 10 minutes, during which Evans monitored both his depth gauge and the behavior of the oceanic whitetip that continued to follow him toward the surface. Dr. Mitchell had been monitoring Evans's dive progress from the surface and immediately recognized the emergency when he surfaced ahead of schedule with obvious signs of injury. The research vessel was equipped with comprehensive medical supplies specifically chosen for treating marine animal injuries in remote locations where professional medical assistance might be hours away. Mitchell's training in emergency medical response proved invaluable as she quickly assessed the extent of Evans's injuries and began appropriate treatment. The bite wounds required immediate cleaning and disinfection to prevent infection from the numerous bacteria typically found in shark mouths. Mitchell applied antibiotic ointment and pressure bandages to control bleeding while documenting the injury patterns for later analysis by marine biologists studying shark behavior. While impressive in appearance, the wounds avoided major blood vessels and nerve pathways that could have resulted in permanent disability. Evans's injuries, while painful and requiring several stitches when they returned to port, were relatively minor compared to what might have resulted from a sustained attack by such a large predator. The incident provided valuable data about oceanic whitetip investigative behavior, while reinforcing the importance of maintaining constant awareness during open water research operations. The research team modified their diving protocols following the incident, implementing additional safety measures, including shark deterrent devices and closer surface support during future encounters with oceanic whitetips. Evans returned to diving operations the following week with enhanced respect for the unpredictable nature of shark behavior in open ocean environments. However, his commitment to understanding these remarkable predators remained unchanged.